Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Carla Alegria, Project Manager with the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. Today's webinar, Family-Centered Toolkit for Domestic Violence Programs, an Overview, Part 3, Supporting Caregivers, Strengthening Parent-Child Relationships, and panel discussion, will be presented by Susan Blumenfeld and Jeannette Baca. Before we get started today, I would like to go over some technical details of the WebEx software that we'll be using for today's webinar. Please be aware that your screen might look a little different depending on whether you're using a Mac, PC, or you're on your smartphone. On the right-hand side of the screen, there are a few boxes. Towards the bottom is the chat feature. You may have to click on the chat icon at the bottom right of your screen to open your chat box. This feature will allow you to provide feedback and share resources with your fellow colleagues, as well as get in touch with the presenter if you have any questions regarding the training content. You may contact me if you have any questions troubleshooting the WebEx software. To do this, click on the down-facing arrow and select the person you would like to contact. You'll see a lot of options, but for this session, you'll want to select everyone if you would like to respond to a question from the presenter or to contact center staff at any time during the session. So let's test this chat feature. Will everyone please go to the chat box, click on everyone, type in where you're calling from, and then press enter. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all very much. While you can get a lot out of the chat feature, there are times when it moves really quickly and it can feel distracting. If this is true for you, feel free to minimize the chat box by clicking the arrow next to where it says chat. You can always open it again with the same arrow if you choose. Time permitting, we'll moderate the Q&A towards the end via the chat box. And at the very end of the webinar, we'll share a brief survey in the chat. Please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better. If you get disconnected at any point, return to the email you received with the original webinar link and re-enter the training. Sometimes the sound cuts out due to internet connection, so feel free to call back in if that's a problem for you. If you're experiencing technical difficulties and are unable to contact me, please contact WebEx Tech Support to resolve any issues. That number, which I'll post in the chat box, is 1-866-229-3239. And with that, thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to turn it over to Susan.
Thank you, Carla. Welcome, everybody. So this is the third and final overview of our new resource, the Family-Centered Toolkit for Domestic Violence. And as Carla said, today we're going to be focusing on the sections in the toolkit related to supporting caregivers with best practice guidance on strengthening parent-child relationships affected by domestic violence. This also includes introducing developmentally sensitive activities. In addition, we're so pleased to have a panel of domestic violence service providers joining us to share their perspective on the toolkit. And if you're unfamiliar with our website, Carla has already archived the webinar recording from part 1 with the slide set, and part 2 in today's webinar will be available in the next week or two. So if you're joining us for the first time, you can always catch up. All right. So again, I'm Susan Blumenfeld, and Jeannette Baca, who will be presenting in a few minutes, is my colleague, friend, and co-author on this toolkit. So we both wanted to welcome everyone today. So we're a national resource and TA center located in Chicago, and we're a special issue resource center dedicated to addressing the intersections between domestic violence, trauma, mental health, and substance use. And if you're not already familiar with us, we really have a great array of resources, including a lot of archived webinars and tip sheets that you might find helpful. So we would just encourage you to check us out. And then this just gives you who our funder is and the fact that we may be expressing views today that don't necessarily reflect the official positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, so I like to start every one of these out with just getting grounded and centered with our breath. So I'd like to invite you to join me now, whether you're sitting or standing, just get comfortable. And if you feel like it, you can close your eyes, you can glance downwards, or you can focus on the stones in the picture. So just take a minute to tune into how you're breathing right now without pushing or forcing anything. And what we're going to do next is we're going to take 3 deep breaths. And we're going to breathe in through our nose, and then we're going to exhale through our mouths with an audible hum. This should be at your own pace and whatever feels right for you. And of course, this varies from person to person. When you exhale, see if you can hold it a little longer than the in-breath. All right, so we're going to get started in a minute. Here we go. Breath number 1. And if your eyes were closed, you can open them, refocus on the screen. And I just think this is such a helpful reminder for all of us to breathe. It really is an antidote to the stress that we face every day in our lives. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jeannette for a moment.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So today is part 3 of our webinar series to introduce and give an overview of the Family-Centered Toolkit for Domestic Violence Programs. Here's our cover. So we hope that some of you have had a chance to check out our toolkit through the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health's website. So if not, no worries. We just want to encourage you all to check it out after today's webinar. So for today, we will be covering sections 9, 10, 11, and 12 of the toolkit. So we'll start by covering the sections related to supporting caregivers, and we will offer some examples of using activities with caregivers and their children. So then we'll be hearing from a panel of domestic violence supervisors and staff who were part of the toolkit implementation phase. We really appreciate them being with us today and looking forward to hearing from them and what they have to say. We will also have a 5-minute stretch break before the panel presentation. And similar to the last 2 weeks, for those of you who joined us before, we'll have a brief survey at the end of this last webinar. So turning it back to you, Susan, to start us talking about section 9.
Thanks, Jeannette. Okay, so when I was getting ready for the webinar today, I was really thinking about what's at the heart of section 9 and what were some of the kind of overarching goals that Jeannette and I had as we were putting this together. And I think it's important to point out that over the years, we know that advocates and sometimes children's counselors who are primarily working with children may not feel comfortable or confident in engaging parents and caregivers. And again, we're using parents and caregivers interchangeably today as we do throughout the Toolkit. So the idea is to increase comfort, to have information, strategies, resources that you can turn to that are going to help you in your practice. And then for staff who are working primarily with adult survivors, to enlarge the frame and perspective so that they're thinking also about the survivor as a parent and in their parenting role. And that they also have the tools and resources to think holistically about the family and what's going to be supportive to this survivor who's also parenting. So what you have here is we really feel quite strongly that it's so important to form strong partnerships with protective parents. And we know that there's some kind of barriers that we have to get through with this, because survivors who are parenting have often experienced harsh and ongoing humiliation and criticism and control around their parenting role from their intimate partners. And we know that they also may feel and are criticized by other authorities, such as school personnel, and sometimes perhaps child welfare as well, and other family and child serving systems, where their knowledge and expertise as a parent feels diminished. So we want to be sensitive to that, and there's a lot of practice guidance in here around that. And so we want to partner in a way that honors what the survivor as a parent knows about their own children, so that we can begin to build a trusting relationship and alliance with them on behalf of themselves and their children. So we also spend some time in this section looking at readiness to receive, to engage in services, and we have some thoughts on sequencing and layering in services. And again, we know that every family and every situation is somewhat unique, but we're giving you kind of broad strokes with this. So what we've heard from parents over the years around gauging readiness is they might be afraid that if an advocate or counselor is seeing a child or their child or children separately, that their child won't open up, or the opposite. They may fear that there are unintended consequences of what a child might share that might violate some secrets that they're trying to protect within the family, and that there might be some risks involved in terms of escalating violence and danger. So again, in this section, we did cover this. In another section, we just talk about the importance of discussing confidentiality and how we plan to offer services and what the parent's role would be in that if we're doing separate services. And we also point out some disadvantages to having very separated services where there's no integrated approach. So I cannot tell you how many times I've talked with advocates that have said, you know, I had this really strong alliance going with one of the children in the families, and then the parents stopped bringing them to sessions. And there may have been lots of reasons why, but one of the reasons may be that if we don't engage with caregivers, they may not have the same commitment to seeing this through for their children and themselves. And also it can stir feelings of competition with us as the provider. We certainly see that playing out between the intimate partner who's used violence and the protective partner. So some thoughts on that. And then we have some just practice tips that we've gotten, you know, that we've learned probably the hard way in our own practice, but often when we're seeing children primarily, we'll invite the parent in the first like maybe 5-10 minutes of the session if we're separating them out. And what often happens is the parent comes in And it's a time for them to start to tell us about all the things that have been stressful or worrisome or difficult right now with their child. And of course, this is in front of their child. So what we are recommending instead is that you figure out a way to continue to involve and engage the parent, but have some separate conversation with them so that you can be there to support them through whatever's going on right now for the family. And we also have some thoughts, particularly when folks come into shelter, about level of safety or stability that's going on right now within the family. And families may not feel ready to engage in talk and play and other ways to express what their experiences have been. And so we're really suggesting that no matter where the family is starting from, that we can still offer some safe and fun activities that can build some closeness and happiness between family members. And when Jeannette talks about section 12 a little later in the webinar today, you'll hear some more about what we include in that section. The other thing that we talk about is that it's very easy for us, if we're working with one part of the family, to become identified with that person, right? And so we're looking at some of the pitfalls that may occur and really asking staff to reflect on who they're most identified with. And sometimes what we see playing out is that there can be conflicts and splits within a family, and those get played out between us within our programs. So lots to think about there. And I think what we would recommend as a best practice is that there are distinct advantages to seeing the family members together, at least during an initial planning phase, so that you're not hearing indirectly about how they view each other, but you're seeing it in front of you, and you may get a very different sense. And then whether or not you've separated services out, we really encourage you to figure out some ways to do family-based services, either periodically or throughout. And with very young children, and I think we covered this last time, we think that the treatment or of choice would be to involve the caregiver and their young child under the age of 5 and under. I think as domestic violence advocates, supervisors, and providers, we know how challenging parenting after separation can be. So we spend some time looking at that with parents who may be separated but are sharing responsibilities and custody arrangements. And although the toolkit does not focus primarily on working with abusive partners, in this section, we do talk a little bit about what we see as a sequence for engaging abusive partners, depending on what your organization offers or who you're collaborating with, partnering with. So we do feel that it's important that abusive partners are able to acknowledge the harms done to their partner and to their children. And often, in our experience in talking to others, abusive partners, intimate partners, may be really motivated to improve their relationship with their children. And so in this section, we talk a little bit about that. We describe partner abuse intervention program services, and we link you to some resources of what's going on that's a little more cutting edge out there in terms of engaging with abusive partners when those sort of conditions are in place. Okay. So I think this is the first time, and maybe it's not the first time in the toolkit, but it's one of the times in which we talk about the guide for engaging and supporting parents affected by domestic violence. And if you're not familiar with it, you've got the link here that's on our website. And we would just encourage you, because we know how difficult it is to engage in sensitive conversations with parents and caregivers about their children and about their parenting. And so I think this will give you some resources and strategies and ways for finding your way through. And it's a much shorter resource than the Family Violence Family Centered Toolkit. Okay, we're at our brain break time, so I'm going to take a sip of water. And just pause and look at that adorable little baby. Wow. Okay, so as I said earlier, there are 3 sections around working with caregivers. And so this second one is designed to give domestic violence advocates more information and tools and ways to engage in dialogue with survivors who have mental health needs or conditions. And we know how common this is. We also know that domestic violence itself impacts one's mental health and well-being. So we know you're encountering this a lot, but often what may be missing in terms of information or training that you've gotten is, so how do we think about this holistically in terms of the parent or caregiver that has mental health issues, needs, conditions? And then how do we layer in knowing that that's there, first engaging with them, but also engaging in conversations with them about the needs of their children and how they might talk about what's going on for them. So let's see. We have a number of text boxes throughout the toolkit, and in this section we have one that offers some prompts in terms of engaging and entering into a conversation with a parent who has mental health challenges. And of course, with pacing and pauses that take into account the mindset and responses of the survivor. But some of the prompts are related to coercive tactics that the abusive partner might use around the survivor's mental health. So for instance, one of the prompts is, has your partner or ex-partner tried to undermine your sense of sanity, called you crazy, tried to discredit you to others who might be sources of help and support? Then we ask about, have you sought mental health services in the past? And if so, how did that go? And then we can also ask, has your partner or ex-partner discouraged you from getting mental health services or used other coercive tactics, such as controlling your medications or stopping you from accessing care? And then, we want to add another prompt is, what's helped you cope? What's helped you regain balance and more well-being in your life? And so in this section, we provide guidance on making referrals for mental health services and other supports, and emphasize the importance of having those collaborative relationships with community providers who are domestic violence savvy and trauma informed. And I think, we start by really exploring what the survivor caregiver's view of mental health is. So not only what their experiences may have been, which may have been very negative, right? But also what are their beliefs and how do they view well-being? And so we want to be sensitive to that. And so we have a section in here that really, towards the end, in critical conversations, which is one of the parts that repeats in each of the sections, we have something around exploring our own biases. Do we believe that somebody with significant mental health challenges cannot be a good parent? What are our biases around mental health and mental illness, and how do we view this? So again, this section is not to turn advocates into mental health counselors, but it is to give you background and resources that's going to help you be more sensitive to and responsive to caregivers who have mental health needs and challenges. And before I leave this section, just thinking about the fact that we can help caregivers and children talk about parental mental health conditions in language that fits for the family and is also developmentally sensitive. So, and we also have a vignette at the end of this particular section with a mother who has an infant and several young children and seems very depressed. She's living in shelter. And so this one helps us further explore the intersection between domestic violence and postpartum depression. And we know that victims of domestic violence are more at risk for developing postpartum depression. And so looking at that and what we might consider. So after we've kind of tuned into our own responses and we've had these sensitive dialogues with parents where they're sharing and we're sharing resources, if that makes sense, that we also within the toolkit in this section provide some developmentally sensitive ways for the parent to talk about their own mental health struggles and conditions. And so, you know, we have to begin by supporting and acknowledging and normalizing how mental health struggles may impact their role as a parent currently. And when they're ready to engage with us in thinking about this, and here the guide I think is a helpful way to approach some of this. We can bring awareness to how their struggles or mental health issues may be impacting their child or children. And that's so delicate to get into because there's so much societal stigma about mental health. There's silence, there's fear, there's shame, there's secrecy. So all of that, can be very difficult. So again, it's a process. Parents may come to us and they maybe have had a lot of mental health treatment, some of which has been good and some of which has really been awful. So they're going to come with their own biases, or they might not be quite ready yet to seek services. So we know it's a process, but when you can enter into conversations, we really think that the value here is that children are reading what's going on with their parents and they're blaming themselves, they're feeling anxious, they're taking responsibility sometimes for taking care of their parents and their younger siblings. And so this is a way of really beginning to broach something that may have been surrounded and shrouded in silence. So parents can explain, if this is the case, that they're getting support for their own mental health and reassuring their children that their mood or behavior is not their children's fault. So very similar to the way we talk about domestic violence. And then we can encourage children as they get older to ask questions and voice their fears and concerns. And then we can support caregivers to talk with their children in a developmentally sensitive way. And we give some examples and language around that, such as, sometimes I get really sad or upset, and I'm learning how to cope with those feelings and get the support I need. And then depending on the situation, from other grown-ups, from going to a group, from getting therapy, taking my medications, or some other culturally specific healing approach that the parent's using. And that's helping me to manage and feel better. And when I'm not feeling well and may need some rest or time to myself, I know it can feel lonely and scary for you. Let's figure out a way for you to be okay until I'm feeling more like myself again. So there can be strategies like going to play at a cousin's house, being with another adult family member in the extended family or community, putting on a favorite DVD. And of course, with infants and very young children, we may need to think with the adult survivor who has mental health challenges about what would give them respite as they're seeking help and still attend to the needs of their children and be responsive. So that might be quality daycare and natural supports within the extended family and community. And those can be such important lifelines for families. So throughout this section, we provide guidance, resources, suggestions that are flexible and can be adapted to the individual caregiver and their family. Okay, now, quick green break, and I'm going to turn this over to Jeannette.
Thanks, Susan. So let's talk about what's in section 11. This is a topic area that Susan and I really recognize as important in supporting survivors who are parenting. So this section is designed to give domestic violence advocates information and tools to engage with survivors specifically regarding their substance use issues. Section 11 offers an approach that is very similar to what Susan was talking about in terms of the last two sections on supporting caregivers. So it's important that we focus on first forming that strong partnership with survivors who are parenting. So as discussed in section 9 a little earlier, and how we can support parents and caregivers affected by domestic violence by really tuning in and being sensitive to their unique experiences and respecting and honoring their choices and beliefs. So we see survivors who are parenting, right, as the experts on their children's experiences, and we will be better able to effectively address substance use issues if we first have formed that collaborative working alliance with the survivor. So we know there can be an overlap between domestic violence and substance use. And we understand that survivor substance use may very well be connected with their experiences of abuse and trauma. And survivors' use of substances may be impacting their relationships with their children. So section 11 includes information about the scope of parental substance use in the United States, providing some statistics on adults who are using substances, as well as the impact of parental substance use on children. So the toolkit offers some guidance on responding to parental substance use, as well as increasing our self-awareness on how we are responding to survivors who use substances and are currently parenting. So as advocates and counselors, we know we might have some biases that come up around substance use and parenting, and this can impact how we structure our programs and the services that we provide to families. The toolkit offers some prompts for considering why survivors might be using substances. So these can be used for self-reflection or for staff group discussions. We also offer some information on factors to consider that can either increase or lessen the impact of parental substance use on children. For example, just something to consider is the child's age when the parental substance use was most problematic for the family, right? So for example, just thinking about infants and young toddlers are much more dependent on their parents for their care and nurturing. So we also provide specific questions to use when initiating a conversation with survivors who use substances. How to stay curious and encourage survivors to be reflective. So we never want to assume how a parent's substance use may be negatively impacting their children, but we can be curious and ask the caregiver, the parent, what they believe is the impact on their children. And then we can carefully offer our observations as well. So we never want to be in a position where we're mandating actions that we want them to take, or where we might be engaging in conversations that may feel shaming. But we want to offer some opportunities to talk honestly about the situation in non-threatening ways while conveying our concern. And so, for example, we just offer some suggestions like, We know that using drugs can make it more difficult to keep yourself and your children safe, right? How do you think your substance use is impacting your current safety? So just suggestions like that. So again, we want to engage in those sensitive conversations and encourage survivors to be reflective on how they believe their substance use is impacting their children, their relationships with their children, and their parenting. So section 11 is a little unique in that it also offers a specific Q&A section. So there's some common questions that are relevant to thinking about how best to support survivors who are using, and it includes ideas for residential settings as well. Similar to other sections of the toolkit, we also provide extensive resources as well as suggestions for offering those resources or making referrals for survivors who are using substances. So we talk a little bit about supporting survivors dealing with substance issues and really supporting that caregiver and child relationship. And Susan shared some about that within section 9 as well. And so we want to promote safety for the family. So we include suggestions ranging from cultivating that trustworthy relationship with parents and children to minimize any shame or need for secrecy regarding the substance use, to also safety planning for children during times of parental substance use. There's specific residential suggestions on considering room assignments. I know that comes up for shelter programs when you have survivors who are actively using, to even posting sharps containers, right, in commonly used spaces. Needless to say, we've got lots of ideas in that section. Next slide, Susan, please. So I wanted to make sure to point you all to this resource. The National Center has this guide called Committed to Safety for All Survivors, Guidance for Domestic Violence Programs on Supporting Survivors Who Use Substances. So please check it out for additional information and guidance. And the website is listed there if you all want to take a quick screenshot, but hopefully most of you are familiar with the National Center's website, and you can find it if you enter that title. Look, another little reminder to just pause, take a deep breath or a sip of water. All right. And then we can move on to section 12. So section 12 is divided into 2 subsections. So one subsection has activities that domestic violence advocates and counselors can introduce to caregivers and their children. And then the other subsection has activities that advocates can use to engage with children and teens individually or in groups, but without their caregivers. So section 12 begins by just offering some strategies for engaging families, right? Basically, it's a brief reminder of maintaining our family-centered, trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and developmentally sensitive lens when considering all of the activities included in this section. So just a reminder of understanding the role of attachment relationships and domestic violence. And our goal is to strengthen attachment and support families making repairs to any ruptures that may have occurred. So considering that when selecting activities. That second component is to remember to use a developmentally sensitive approach when selecting activities. And it's easy to make helpful adaptations as needed based on the child's development. That third piece is to introduce activities that are culturally inclusive and honor the caregiver's practices. So we can invite conversations even about play and beliefs about play. So we really want to collaborate with caregivers when selecting activities. We would never want to force an activity on a family, right? And then the fourth piece is to remember to hold that awareness of how trauma responses may affect caregivers and their children's capacity to engage in the activities. You might have something planned, but we want to make sure that everyone's paying close attention to when there's dysregulation and the family may not be in an optimal state to engage with each other. And it's okay to switch gears, stop, change activities, right? The activities are presented with clear directions. Some also have links to YouTube videos and other resources. And there's links to activity handouts, which can be printed or shared digitally with families. So honestly, these activities are just a beginning list, but we wanted to offer some helpful, quick, and inexpensive ideas for folks to try out. All right, so just to tell you how the activities are divided in each subsection. They're grouped broadly by age and developmental stage and then divided into 3 broad categories. So the ages and developmental stages are birth to 3, so the little ones, 4 to 8-year-olds, 9 to 12-year-olds, and then teens, 13 and older. And there are some activities for working with families that are grouped into 3 categories. So like co-regulating and soothing, right? Some of the co-regulating activities offer ways to create a shared experience that supports caregivers to be co-regulators for their children. So when their kids are distressed. So we have everything from like for babies, an activity might be baby burrito, so some swaddling, or for older kids, right? Activities like mindfulness. The second category is moving and playing together. And this category offers really easy ideas for parents and their children to play with each other and move, like something easy, like just following the leader, right? And encouraging the child to be leading and the caregiver to be following. Playing feeling charades. So kids are acting out what a feeling might look like and parents are guessing. The third category is creative and expressive arts. So we offer ideas like painting with water, which is really easy to clean up, right? For toddlers, to creating a family strengths collage with older children. So there is another subsection of activities, so that second subsection, that advocates can use to support children and teens when the parent or caregiver is not present. So again, these are divided into the same ages and developmental stages and the same 3 categories. So we included ideas just to say that need minimal materials and are really easy to do in residential settings. All right, so we wanted to offer you all an example of just one activity. So this is treasure search and scavenger hunt. So again, in addition to the description of the activity, right, there are some external URLs for some of the activities. And we also created handouts that are tear and go. So you can easily, if you're able to, download and print them if you would like, but no need to. Okay, so back to the treasure search and scavenger hunt. It's an example. I just wanted to say that it's an activity that can be adapted depending on the age and stage of the children, who is leading the activity, and whether or not the parent is involved. So if the caregiver is there, we might invite the family to take a walk. Maybe if it's safe to be outside or in a space that has fencing, to look for special rocks or leaves or sticks, those found treasures, right? Maybe it's a bottle cap or a piece of string, whatever it may be. And then the family can co-create a temporary design on the ground or tell each other a story about that object or treasure. So different things that they can do. Or instead, advocates can guide children, maybe with their siblings or in a group of other children, with or without caregivers, right, to search for specific items that might be found in the shelter, maybe in the shelter kitchen or another space. And so advocates might say, all right, everyone find something that's orange, which is maybe easy to do in the fall season right now, or something that's soft or something you can play with. So this is an activity that can also be modified for telehealth services. So it might be a way to engage with children and families online. So you ask the family to look around the room that they are in and find something that they can draw with, right? Or something made of metal. Advocates can also play along with this to engage with children. An invitation like, let's race and see who can find something shiny, right? It's just a nice way to play virtually. So again, there's lots of easy to do, easy to modify activities to try out. So I'm being really mindful of the time right now and realizing we're due for our 5-minute stretch break, and then we'll return with our panelists. So I think we'll take a break now and come back together at 1:20. That's New Mexico time. So 2:20 for those of you in Central time.
Welcome back, everybody. You know, I was thinking, and so was Jeanette, that unlike our first two parts, we really haven't had a chance to hear from our participants today. And so I'm wondering if folks can put into the chat what resonated for you as Jeanette and I were talking about the sections related to supporting caregivers and their children and activities. So if you want to go ahead and put something in the chat, that would be great. In the meantime, you can look at that adorable cat that's stretching even though we're back from our break. Does anybody have any thoughts that they want to put in? What resonated for you? Okay. Yeah, the subject of substance use and how can we engage parents around that? Yeah, great. Because when we're holding the whole family in mind, there can be, it's very complex, right? To take into mind everybody's needs and their well-being. Yes, part about parents being able to let their child know that their behavior isn't, that with mental health issues isn't their fault. Yeah, and Molly was saying hard conversations, especially when talking with teens. Yeah, thank you for those comments. Great. So we are gonna. So this is a part that I know many of you have been waiting to hear directly from our panel, and so just want to give you a little bit of background. As we began to put the toolkit together, it was really critical for us to get input directly from domestic violence providers. And we had a long-standing history with domestic violence agencies in the Chicago metropolitan area and in New Mexico, who were interested in enhancing and expanding child and family-centered services. And so Jeannette and I were able to draw on those relationships, and we invited 6 organizations to participate as implementation sites for the Toolkit project. And this took place over a period of about 7 months from the end of 2020 through spring of this current year. And one of the ways in which I think our implementation sites were very helpful to us was that everybody was in the midst of looking at telehealth and virtual services, which are particularly challenging with children and families. And so we have included that in our toolkit. And they really helped us in other ways shape the content. They provided review and comment on the full draft, and they participated in monthly all-site training sessions, and each site received some customized TA from Jeannette and or from myself. And what we were really thought was important was that with taking all of the 6 sites together, they all represented the range of domestic violence services that agencies offer. So center-based and range of residential services, as well as services for intimate partners who use violence and supervised visitation. So we are extremely grateful to these 6 organizations listed on the slide for their participation, for their enthusiasm and feedback. And so now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to our panelists. Okay, so and each of them are going to introduce themselves, but we have 5 of the 6 sites represented here. And we are going to begin with Diana. So Diana, if you can unmute, you are on.
Hello, my name is Diana Morales. I am from Sarah's Inn. Again, we are a domestic violence agency in Illinois in the Chicagoland area. So I'll begin by talking a little bit about how this toolkit is helpful for me in my role. So I really find value in the toolkit, really enhancing family-centered services. As my role in my agency, we work with families who have experienced domestic violence and work with them to heal and strengthen that parent-child relationship, We work with adults, adolescents, and children. Family-centered work, family-centered work services provide support to the parent so that the parent may provide support to their children in this healing process. Family-centered services create this space for this parallel process to take place. In my role, it is important to recognize that a parent is the expert of their child and their relationship together. It is important to remember that supporting the parent regulate is an important piece in helping the family co-regulate. Integrating family-centered services can provide a large range of support for the family as a unit. Similarly, when working with children individually, we can provide support to the parent so that the child can continue to receive support throughout the week outside of the counseling setting. When we think about it, the child may be receiving or seeing us 1 hour a week. So really providing that extra parenting support can really provide support for the child in the long run. On an organizational level, this toolkit may be used within our organization at Sarah's in team-based meetings to guide discussions and evaluate current programming. By reviewing the current programming, the agency may find ways to continue to grow the services that are offered at our agency and determine the level of family focus. At Sarah's Inn, we have asked our advocates to be familiar with this tool so that in their intervention and advocacy services they provide, the counselors have the whole family in mind. While they are working with the parent through the crisis intervention, they're thinking through how to hold the whole family in a way that the parent cannot or may not be able to in that present time. This tool may be helpful for counselors who may not have done long-term work in the field or family work previously. For example, counselors that may work primarily with adults or primarily with parents or caregivers only and have not gotten the opportunity to engage in family work in other positions or roles that they have taken on. Another way we utilize the tool at our agency is by training our interns to look at this guide to understand the framework of parent and family-oriented interventions. And this tool can also be helpful in case management settings as it provides guidance in the work with families and offers various intervention options. From the time my supervisor had started at Sarah's Inn about 6 or 7 years ago, Sarah's Inn as an agency has worked towards moving more towards family-centered practices. Sarah's Inn has implemented more family practices, interventions, and programming as time has moved on. For supervisors, this tool may be used as a tool to promote more reflection in our work with clients. In our agency, it has prompted supervisors to discuss the toolkit in meetings and in case management settings, and has increased the level of reflective practice. It informs our whole agency at Sarah's Inn across departments, including departments working on prevention services and having the whole family in mind while working with the kids in the school setting. Overall, the toolkit is a tangible tool to guide our practice and guides us to find more information on family work. Overall, the toolkit may be useful to other organizations in similar roles in domestic violence programs across the country, as programs are always able to adjust and integrate new interventions in providing support for families that they work with. They may be able to incorporate new innovative ways to engage families and services. The toolkit offers creative ways to extend services to families who may face barriers to receiving services. And the toolkit may begin to shift the approach or framework that other domestic violence agencies use. It may also be used as an evaluation tool for current programming.
Thank you so much, Diana. That is a lot. And we're so happy that you can share your perspective, not only for yourself, but for your agency. And I neglected to say that after our panel talks that the participants may have some direct questions for each of them. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go on to hear from Molly. Molly, if you can unmute yourself and give your perspective.
Hello, everyone. My name is Molly Dolores. I'm the Children's Capacity Building Program Supervisor at Roberta's Place in Grants, New Mexico. We are a domestic violence agency with both a non-residential center and emergency shelter. We offer services, domestic violence education, the Batterers Intervention Program, case management, counseling, and our children's program services. We are uniquely located in an area surrounded by Native American and Hispanic populations. Our team has been most honored by the invitation to assist in developing this innovative family-centered toolkit. Recently, here at Roberta's Place, all staff have been providing children's program services, which is important to meeting goals of starting families on their healing journeys, building resiliency and strengthening bonds, and finding support systems. The toolkit provides an important blueprint for service engagement, meeting our participants and guests where they are, from the welcome we offer at the shelter or the office. We set the tone. Ultimately, people will decide immediately if we're safe. For example, when folks go to our shelter, we welcome them at the door. We offer them a welcome kit that includes toiletries, essentials that they may need, also the Wi-Fi password, because in this day and age, technology is very important and folks want to stay connected. It's also a way to help the children, just become more more familiar and more comfortable with staff. Also allowing folks to take the time to get settled, to have time to have a meal. This might be the first time that they just had the opportunity to sit and rest. So another important component of the toolkit for Roberta's Place is promoting cultural awareness and serving people in the capacities that they're familiar with. Our staff and team offer bilingual services and assistance and cultural access when needed to these people. Like I mentioned before, our populations are highly Native American or Hispanic. So it's very important for us to be aware of the cultural differences, offering access to intakes, to services in their native tongues, offering access to practice their religions and traditional culture. The toolkit also provides opening for conversations between staff and supervisors, for feedback and having roles in developing family-oriented services. The chapters in the toolkit are well structured with easy to follow guidelines. The vignettes help put focal points into practice and are adaptable to our agency's own situations, or can be adaptable to another agency's situations. Access to the toolkit is essential to enriching team knowledge and hope giver abilities. The reach of the toolkit is very phenomenal. Domestic violence advocates and programs may find more empowerment in their voices by using the toolkit. The people we serve have already been silenced too long. We need to let them be heard. Let us believe them. Let us have an opportunity to hear their story. Let us be their champions. Moving beyond victimization and becoming a survivor, and then one day a thriver. Unlike many other pandemics, domestic violence may not dissipate. It is our goal to raise awareness, and we must keep bringing the awareness to the table and breaking taboos of reporting. The passion and dedication of advocates, organized or grassroots, will propel the future of families and children we serve. And this is what we see in the people that come through our doors, that leave. No matter how long that they stay with us, they know that they've been supported, whether it was for a day, for 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, through the whole pandemic. They know wholeheartedly that the passion that my team has helped them on their next steps. So I am most thankful for this opportunity to be a part of changers, because that's what I view as us all as our changers. May you all be protected in your work. I want to always promote self-care and, self-love. In my language, I want to offer an offering of safety for each and every one of you. And again, just thank you to Jeannette and Susan and to everybody who's been a part of this toolkit and who's been a part of changing the way that we view family services.
Thank you so much, Molly. That was beautiful and really appreciated your perspective and what you were offering to us. Next, we're going to hear from Mutal.
Hi everyone, my name is Mutal Khan and I'm a shelter/housing advocate and case manager at Apna Ghar Inc., which is a nonprofit organization that works with survivors of gender-based violence, which includes domestic violence, or in short, DV. We provide emergency shelter, counseling services, legal advocacy, and supervised visitation and safe exchange program services. So by training, I'm actually a counselor, so most of the materials in this toolkit aren't new to me, but I really like the way it's written and structured, meaning to the point and complex concepts explained in layman's terms. That is something you don't usually see in resources. It's usually very technical and all the psychological jargon that includes it. So it's very user-friendly. Usually when you look at informational materials or toolkits, the sole focus is on our clients, which is good. But the better thing is that this toolkit covers staff members of an organization as well, whether they're direct staff, supervisors, managers, or have other roles in the organization. It uses vignettes to bring up the issues, highlights problems, facilitating critical conversations such as between direct staff member and or their supervisor, which can improve the quality of overall service and enhance one's advocacy skills. For instance, vignette on page 20, which involves a supervisor named June, and issues of rules implemented for the families in a DV shelter to follow. These rules in the beginning were intended to provide safety for families, but eventually ended up creating barriers for families. In this case, the toolkit highlights the elephant in the room and gives suggestions in starting a dialogue and exploring the elephant, which is the resistance to change. This definitely is something that I can relate to because many of our clients have brought this up from time to time because it triggers them and in some cases re-victimizes them to a point that they see shelter advocates as their abusers. Because their abusers also did the same thing, one of the things being controlling. So even though we have good intentions, sometimes it doesn't translate that way or manifests that way. Another section that I'm glad that the toolkit covers is that of teletherapy. In the wake of COVID, it has become imperative that we adapt to virtual services, and I like how it acknowledges that technology may increase risk for survivors, followed by giving suggestions on making sure that clients have access to digital media, how to collaborate with clients to create a safety plan, and planning to find a confidential space for clients to ensure that no one is able to listen to their sessions, whether it's family members or someone they may not want, want to know. Also to minimize distractions and use the foundational aspects that we already have been using prior, that is when providing in-person services to our clients. DV organizations, whether newly established or old ones, both can benefit from this toolkit in different capacities and will be a great asset in training new hires, managing conflict among staff members and the ones with the clients, facilitating critical and sensitive discussions, revisiting and enhancing existing guidelines and policies throughout the different programs or services to provide culturally sensitive, family-centered, and trauma-informed services. It is very user-friendly and educational whether staff members are coming from more of a mental health background or that of management field or any other roles. It fills in the gaps, facilitates in developing and improving team building skills, highlights and addresses our arch nemesis, which is vicarious trauma. And overall, it provides opportunities for professional development. Furthermore, this valuable resource covers the basics of this work well and builds a foundation for delivering effective family-centered services. Last but not least, I believe DV agencies may also use this malleable resource to mold it according to their mission statement values, thereby targeting them in accordance to the population they serve. I'm sorry, I also had a timer to make sure that it's within time frame, so sorry about that.
Are you done with that? Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope our listeners do too, the things that you highlighted and what you have gotten from it in your perspective. Thank you so much. All right. Well, so we're next, Yvonne, you are on. Can unmute.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you today. My name is Yvonne Duarte. I'm a clinical social worker in the state of New Mexico. My role during the implementation phase for the Family Center Toolkit was as a staff therapist and then clinical supervisor with Enlace Comunitario. Enlace Comunitario is a nonprofit agency located in Albuquerque, New Mexico, dedicated to serve domestic violence survivors and their families. Enlace was one of the few implementation sites working together with Susan and Jeannette, and I can say that it is because of my participation in this project that I learned to love working with families. I remember like it was yesterday, feeling so intimidated about the idea of working with the whole family as a system. I used to practice from a client-centered perspective, and it was thanks to all the amazing trainings and the information that I have gained across the years, which is now all included in the toolkit, that I lose that fear and I learn to love working with the whole family. I was a therapist fresh out of the oven when I started working with children and individual therapists. So the thought about including the parents or even having a conversation with them about their children used to be very nerve-wracking. I personally believe that absolutely everything included in the toolkit is extremely valuable. It has truly made a difference in my practice, and I can see how it could also help anyone working with domestic violence survivors. From volunteers to interns to advocates to therapists and even people in a leadership role. I witnessed a transition in services while I was with Enlace Comunitario, and it was amazing to see how our services, we moved from being a client center to family center. We started to see more children started to come to us. The giggling, the laughing, having family events. We're not a shelter, we are an outpatient organization, but we always used to make the best effort to have services that included the whole family. And I witnessed that transition from the day that I started to the day I left. As a former clinical supervisor, I can assure that the toolkit could become one of the best resources for any therapist or any staff member coming to this field with limited experience in domestic violence. All the information included in the toolkit would allow any person to gain a deeper understanding about why family-centered services are so important and more effective. The vignettes and the samples of activities, it's something that I still use in my current practice, like, and could become any staff member's best friend, to be honest. Like, whenever you don't know how to go within a specific situation or you have a concern, the toolkit would be a really good resource. I tell you this from my direct experience, and I hope that you all take time to review the toolkit if you haven't done that yet.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much, Yvonne. And I really appreciated your sharing your own personal journey and also the transformation that you saw within LASE. So it's wonderful to hear. Okay, last but definitely not least is Shauna. So Shauna, if you can unmute, we will go to you next.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my name is Shauna, and Shauna Aldal, and I am the clinical director at Esperanza Shelter here in Santa Fe. And we are a domestic violence shelter. We also have non-residential services. So we provide counseling and batterer intervention programming, outreach, and all different types of domestic violence services. So I'm pretty new to my position here as clinical director. Prior to this, I was working over at the shelter. So the toolkit has been very timely for me because I am new in my role as a clinical director. And so I was really excited when this came out, when this toolkit came out, and it's been just really, really helpful for me being new in my role. So here at Esperanza, we provide the Seeds of Hope program provides family-centered services. And really our family-centered services really were established through the Children's Capacity Building Project, which was born through the National Center and the New Mexico Coalition here in the state of New Mexico. So I'm really excited to be able to continue to be a part of that project. We currently have two children, dedicated children and adolescent therapists, and a children's life skills coordinator. And again, this is fairly new to us to be able to have just dedicated staff to be able to provide the family-centered work. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about about the toolkit from the lens of a supervisor. So as I came into my role supervising, our Seeds of Hope program, our children's program, one of my big bucket list items throughout my time here is to really build a really robust supervision process for staff. It was really, really challenging through COVID to do that because we were all pretty much remote. And so it was really hard for me to kind of say, okay, where do we start? How do we really build up our supervision? Because it was really, really needed. We had a lot of staff burnout. And so this, again, as I said, this toolkit was really timely for me because it really offers, comprehensive guidance for some of the most challenging things that we see in our work with survivors and children. It offers, a menu of options and activities to support our families. I really like the concrete guidance and practical tools that it gives. So, again, we are kind of in the process of overhauling our policies and practices, and it will definitely be kind of utilizing this toolkit to help that and really hopefully move in the direction of our entire agency being family-centered, having us family-centered focused. This toolkit's a great reflection tool from my perspective for supervisors. If you are in a supervisory role, it provides really clear definitions and really describes the benefits of family-centered services. It really helped me kind of reflect on, does my organization have the policies that really emphasize the importance of family-centered practices? It looks at physical environment. That continues to be a huge barrier for us here in the COVID world, just trying to find a really safe space for our families to have privacy, to not have to worry about weather. So our counselors really have gone above and beyond to really make it work, but that has been a huge challenge for us. So the focus on the physical environment has been really helpful. It really also, from the lens of a supervisor, it offers some really good structure around individual and group supervision. So, it really helps. There's vignettes. There's a section on, what might supervisors do. So there's sections, I've seen quite a bit of toolkits, but I've never seen a toolkit that really has a whole section just for supervisors. And so that's been super helpful. But again, going back to structure, it just really helps you kind of have activities to do, ask reflective questions for your staff. So that has also been kind of a struggle as we meet and do our regular kind of individual supervision and our group supervision. Sometimes it can feel really unstructured, and sometimes it can turn, it can turn more into a space where people, obviously, dealing with all the things that our advocates and counselors are dealing with, it can turn into kind of a venting session. But through this toolkit, it really offers ways to kind of move it in a strength-based, move it to more of like a strength-based perspective. And it helps, you reflect. Where's my timer? Sorry. It really helps to reflect on, for you to reflect on the conversations, that you're having. It's also just really quick. It's a really great tool for onboarding. So we have, I've had new staff come on board that never worked in have never done domestic violence work. And if you're not familiar with it, it can be a really complete kind of paradigm shift from the traditional, maybe kind of the medical model that our therapists may have been trained in or have worked in other agencies. So it's a really great onboarding tool to help that and to help them kind of understand really the dynamics of domestic violence, and really kind of moving in a direction away from that kind of traditional medical model and more into a trauma-informed model. So those are kind of I highly recommend, if you're in a supervisory role, that you really try, you look at this toolkit and try and move it into your practice as a supervisor.
Thank you so much, Shauna. That's so helpful to kind of hear this from the perspective of a supervisor in a program and now in your role as a clinical director. Really appreciated the things you had to say. Wow, what a panel. You see what a treat it has been for Jeannette and I to work with not only these wonderful people, but also their organizations. So with that, thank you so much. I just really appreciate the thoughtfulness in which you put together your remarks for today's panel. So, Jeannette, I think I'm going to kind of open the floor for people to ask specific questions of our panelists or of Jeannette and myself, or just to make some comments or reflections. We have a few minutes to do that. I think each of the panelists gave us a lot to think about from their perspective and their organization's perspective. And so we hope that this piques your interest. Jeannette, do you have any thoughts you wanted to share?
Just wanted to say, thanks to all the panelists for joining and sharing their comments, and just so grateful that I had a chance to work with them. And due to COVID, Susan was going to do kind of the TA and little mini trainings with the folks in Chicago, and I was working with the folks in New Mexico. But being that we were all on Zoom, we were able to connect, which was an upside to the pandemic for sure, was to be able to get together and work together. But yeah, we'd be happy to hear any comments or any questions that anyone may have. Please put them in chat.
We got a few thank yous, which we appreciate, to everyone. Yeah. Anything else? Well, while you're thinking of your comments, Jeannette, I'm going to advance the slide to the next one. We hope we're still inviting comments or questions. So we launched last week, and you can put this URL into your computers or phones and download our family toolkit. And Amy made a comment, just love hearing from the panelists about how, yeah, absolutely, about how helpful the toolkit has been for their staff and ultimately families. Yeah, we thought it would be helpful to really have a panel reflect on it, because you can hear it from us. We have a little bit of bias being the authors, but it's really wonderful to hear kind of a rich perspective from others that are in the field. Yeah. Anything else? I see Carla also put the link in the chat. And she is also putting in a survey for you to fill out. And I think both Jeannette and I just have a tremendous amount of gratitude for the implementation sites that we work with for our panelists today, and really appreciate all of you attending today and this series. And we're looking forward to hearing comments from you as you start to look at the toolkit. And certainly if there's some other questions that come up as you're reviewing the toolkit, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
We really hope that everyone finds this toolkit useful, and we welcome any feedback. So we'd love to hear from you. And please do fill out that survey. Carla put the link in chat. That's helpful for today's webinar. And yeah, thanks everyone for attending today. Thank you for those of you who have attended the series. Special thanks to our panelists for sharing their perspectives on the toolkit and also just being part of this process with us. Really grateful to have your input. And thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Jeannette. So, wishing everybody a good rest of your day and week ahead. And with that, I think, unless there are a few other comments, we will be ending in a minute or so. Turn this back to Carla.
Yes, thank you, Susan and Jeannette, and to all our panelists, and to everyone for joining today. As Susan mentioned, within the next week or so, we will send out a follow-up email with a link to today's recording and last week's webinar recording, as well as all the slides and handouts referenced. We will also post that on our website. You will also receive a certificate of attendance for both webinars and the evaluations or the surveys. So thank you again so much. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everyone.